I spent a little over $19,000 planning what I thought would be a turning point for my family, a week-long escape meant to reset years of quiet tension and unspoken resentment. The destination was a coastal town in South Carolina, one of those places marketed as peaceful and family-friendly, all sunlit boardwalks and rented beach houses that promised togetherness. I handled everything myself, from reserving the oceanfront property to booking flights and arranging activities. Then, without warning, my wife informed me that her former boyfriend would be joining the trip, and that I was expected to stay behind if accommodations became inconvenient. The announcement did not come with hesitation or apology. It came casually, as if she were rearranging dinner plans instead of removing her husband from a vacation he had fully paid for. Her mother laughed softly at the suggestion and added that my seat could simply be handed over. I remember smiling in that moment, not because it was funny, but because something inside me finally went quiet. My name is Nathan Holloway. I was 47 years old at the time, and for nearly 2 decades I believed that stability, loyalty, and effort were enough to hold a family together. I built my life from the ground up in a way that left little room for excuses. What started as a single rusted pickup truck and a willingness to work overtime turned into a residential renovation business that specialized in distressed properties no one else wanted to touch. I learned plumbing, electrical work, framing, and negotiation all at once, often sleeping on job sites to meet deadlines. Years of that grind transformed my situation entirely. I went from scrambling for loans to controlling a portfolio that produced consistent 7-figure returns. I did not inherit anything. No one handed me connections or capital. Every step forward came from calculated risk and relentless follow-through. My company grew quietly, without flashy marketing, built on referrals and results. While my professional life expanded, my personal life narrowed into routine. I told myself that sacrifice was temporary, and that one day the people closest to me would recognize what I had built for them. That recognition never came. I met my wife, Elaine Porter, when my business was still fragile and unproven. She worked as an administrative assistant in a regional property office and had a talent for conversation that made people feel seen. She helped me locate early deals and introduced me to brokers who otherwise would not have returned my calls. At the time, the relationship felt like a partnership built on shared ambition. Marriage followed naturally, or so I thought. As the business became more profitable, her involvement faded. She stopped working entirely within a few years, framing it as a temporary pause that quietly became permanent. The more I earned, the more her expectations shifted. Travel, furnishings, social events all increased, while her contribution receded into commentary and consumption. I convinced myself that this was normal, that success altered dynamics, and that love meant adapting without complaint. About 6 years before everything unraveled, I purchased a newly constructed home in a gated suburb north of Atlanta. It was larger than we needed, with 4 bedrooms, a sprawling kitchen, and design choices Elaine insisted were essential despite rarely using the spaces they occupied. The house became a symbol rather than a home, something staged and pristine but emotionally hollow. I spent my days restoring warmth and character to neglected buildings for strangers, while my own residence felt like a showroom where I did not belong. 3 years later, Elaine's mother, Judith, moved in after losing her spouse. At the time, the decision seemed practical. There was space, and she needed support. What I failed to anticipate was how quickly she would assume authority over a household she did not finance, treating me less like family and more like an employee who existed to fund her comfort. Elaine's younger brother, Lucas, completed the trio. Well into his 30s and perpetually between opportunities, he drifted through jobs and ideas with equal enthusiasm and equal lack of follow-through. Each new scheme came with a request for short-term help that inevitably became long-term dependency. Car payments, rent assistance, credit card balances, all quietly fell to me. Resistance was framed as cruelty. Compliance was framed as generosity. Over time, I stopped being Nathan and became a resource. When success accumulates, it changes how people speak to you, how they justify entitlement, how easily they dismiss boundaries. I noticed it happening but lacked the resolve to confront it, choosing peace over clarity until neither remained. The coastal vacation was meant to interrupt that pattern. That year alone, my company completed 14 renovations, each netting an average profit well into the five figures. It was the most successful year of my career. I wanted to market with something shared, something that reminded us why we were together beyond convenience. I rented a massive beachfront home large enough for extended family, planned group activities, and prepaid experiences so no one would feel constrained. The total cost was significant but manageable. I saw it as an investment in cohesion. Looking back, I understand now that you cannot purchase respect, and generosity without boundaries only invites exploitation. The first indication that something was wrong came during what should have been an ordinary evening. I was reviewing booking confirmations at the kitchen island, double-checking details, and ensuring everything was finalized. Elaine was nearby, absorbed in her phone, smiling in a way that felt disconnected from the room. When I explained the sleeping arrangements and how everyone would be accommodated comfortably, she barely acknowledged the effort. Then she mentioned, casually, that she had run into someone from her past at a grocery store. She spoke his name without weight, without context, as though it were irrelevant. According to her, he was struggling through a divorce and needed a distraction. She explained that she had already invited him along. The name meant nothing to her in that moment, but it carried history for me. This was not an acquaintance. This was the man she had dated seriously before we met, the one whose photo I had discovered tucked away years into our marriage, the one who had appeared uninvited at our wedding celebration and needed to be escorted out. Hearing his inclusion framed as kindness rather than betrayal made something in me tighten. I asked calmly what his presence had to do with our family vacation. Elaine responded with irritation, suggesting that I was overreacting and implying that maturity meant accepting the arrangement. She framed my discomfort as insecurity and dismissed my role in the planning entirely. Judith entered the conversation at that point, expressing approval and remarking on how energetic the man had always been. The comparison was not subtle. In that moment, I realized this discussion had happened long before I was informed. The casual confidence with which they spoke, the absence of negotiation, made it clear that my consent had never been considered necessary. I was not a partner in the decision. I was the financier expected to comply. As they continued discussing logistics around me, it became clear that my role in the family had been reduced to background support, present but irrelevant. The confirmation came days later during a family dinner meant to celebrate the upcoming trip. The table was full, the atmosphere rehearsed. Elaine sat beside her former partner as though it were natural. Judith presided over the conversation, and Lucas made jokes that landed too close to the truth. The guests spoke politely, complimented the house, and acknowledged my business with a smile that lingered too long. When travel plans were discussed openly and my hesitation surfaced, it was met with irritation rather than curiosity. I was accused of selfishness, of prioritizing money over compassion, as if the two were interchangeable. That was when the unspoken became explicit. The suggestion was made that my place on the trip was optional, that arrangements could proceed without me. And in that moment, I understood exactly where I stood. The moment everything crystallized did not arrive with shouting or dramatic gestures. It arrived quietly, through a sentence spoken with confidence, as if it had already been approved by some invisible authority. Elaine said that if I felt uncomfortable, I did not have to come, that there was no reason for everyone else to miss out just because I was being difficult. Her tone carried certainty, not anger. It assumed compliance. Judith nodded in agreement, adding that family should be flexible and that feelings should not get in the way of a good time. Lucas laughed and suggested that I could enjoy some peace and quiet at home while they handled the beach. That was when the truth finally surfaced in full. I was no longer essential. I was replaceable. My role had been reduced to funding experiences I was no longer invited to enjoy. Sitting there, surrounded by people who felt entitled to my labor but indifferent to my presence, I felt an unfamiliar calm settle over me. The years of frustration, the swallowed objections, the internal bargaining all went silent. In their place came clarity. I stood up without raising my voice, took out my phone, and began undoing everything I had arranged, not as a threat, not as a tactic, but as a decision already made. I canceled the first flight while they watched, the confirmation arriving instantly. Elaine told me to stop, her voice sharp with disbelief. Judith demanded I think about what I was doing, invoking family and responsibility as if those words still carried weight. I continued anyway, revering each reservation with methodical precision. Flights, accommodations, services, all dissolved with a few deliberate taps. The total amount refunded would take days to process, but that no longer mattered. What mattered was reclaiming agency in a situation where my consent had been treated as optional. When Elaine insisted that they would simply proceed without me and give my seat to someone more appreciative, I nodded. She did not realize she had just given me the final confirmation I needed. I agreed with her calmly, told her she was right, and excused myself from the table. The silence that followed was thick, confused, and charged, but I did not linger to explain myself. Explanations were no longer necessary. I packed a single suitcase that night, choosing only what I needed and nothing tied to the identity I was leaving behind. The house felt different as I moved through it, less like a home and more like a stage set I had outgrown. Every room carried evidence of my effort, yet none reflected my presence. Before leaving, I booked a one-way flight to Europe, not out of impulse, but because the thought of distance felt like oxygen. When Elaine demanded I return and talk things through, I declined. Talking had been happening for years without listening. I checked into a quiet hotel near the airport and slept better than I had in months. The next morning, I contacted an attorney recommended years earlier by a business associate, explained the situation briefly, and authorized him to begin separation proceedings immediately. The facts were simple. No children. The business was solely mine. The house was titled in my name. Financial records were clean. The only complexity was emotional, and that was no longer my concern. As I waited to board my flight, my phone filled with messages, apologies layered over accusations, confusion followed by anger. Elaine alternated between pleading and blaming, unable to decide which narrative served her best. Judith accused me of abandonment and ingratitude. Lucas sent a rambling message suggesting I was overreacting to what he called a misunderstanding. I did not respond to any of them. Silence was not punishment, it was protection. Somewhere over the Atlantic, as the plane lights dimmed and the cabin grew quiet, I felt something I had not felt in years. Relief. Not the fleeting kind, but the deep, steady kind that comes from alignment. For the first time in a long while, my actions matched my values. I was no longer subsidizing disrespect. I was choosing myself without apology. The days that followed unfolded slowly, intentionally. I rented a modest apartment overlooking a river in a historic European city, the kind of place where time seemed less urgent and conversations were not transactional. Mornings began with strong coffee and walks through narrow streets where craftsmen still worked with their hands. I stayed connected to my business remotely, delegating inspections and decisions to people I trusted, but I did not rush. Distance gave me perspective. Patterns I had ignored became obvious. The entitlement, the manipulation disguised as need, the way generosity had been weaponized against me. None of it felt abstract anymore. It felt resolved. Meanwhile, back home, reality was setting in for the people who had assumed my absence would change nothing. A former acquaintance reached out quietly and sent me photos from the airport on the day the family vacation was supposed to begin. The images told the story better than any argument could. Suitcases piled together, confused expressions, frantic conversations with airline staff, the matching shirts printed with a family name that no longer included me. The man who was supposed to replace me stood off to the side, already disengaging. He left early, according to the message, making an excuse about another commitment. That detail did not surprise me. People who enter situations through entitlement tend to exit through convenience. I forwarded the photos to my attorney, who replied with a single sentence. "This helps more than you know." Weeks passed. Legal filings progressed. Accounts were separated cleanly and transparently. I did not hide assets or play games. I simply protected what I had built. Back home, the house began to show signs of neglect. Bills went unpaid. Maintenance lapsed. The systems I had quietly managed for years stopped functioning without my involvement. The illusion that I was merely funding a lifestyle rather than sustaining it collapsed quickly. I received updates occasionally, none of them surprising. Arguments escalated. Blame shifted. The same people who once dismissed my concerns now struggled to manage basic logistics without my intervention. At some point, Elaine sent a letter. Not an email or a message, but a handwritten letter, as if slowing down the medium might soften the truth. She admitted mistakes without fully acknowledging the harm. She spoke of regret, but it was framed through loss of comfort rather than loss of trust. She described the consequences unfolding around her, the financial strain, the isolation, the realization that the life she enjoyed had been supported by effort she never respected. I read the letter once, folded it carefully, and placed it in a drawer. I did not respond. Closure does not always require dialogue. Sometimes it requires distance. My life settled into a new rhythm. I consulted on restoration projects, applied my skills to work that would outlast me rather than be sold and forgotten. I met people who valued contribution over consumption, who asked questions instead of making demands. Partnerships formed naturally, based on mutual respect rather than obligation. The contrast was stark and instructive. I had not changed who I was. I had changed who had access to me. That made all the difference. Months later, the divorce was finalized without spectacle. No dramatic courtroom scenes. Just paperwork and signatures marking the end of a chapter that had been eroding long before I left. When the confirmation came through, I felt neither triumph nor bitterness. I felt finished, free in a quiet, grounded way that did not need validation. Standing on a balcony overlooking old stone buildings and flowing water, I understood something fundamental. Walking away was not abandonment. It was boundaries. It was self-respect. It was the decision to stop pouring effort into structures that no longer held. Looking back, the vacation was never the issue. It was the final stress test on a foundation already cracked beyond repair. The invitation that excluded me simply revealed what had been true for years. I had been present but unseen, valued for what I provided rather than who I was. Leaving did not destroy my life. It gave me one. Sometimes the most important renovation is not the one that adds value for resale, but the one that removes what no longer serves you. And sometimes, the moment you stop paying for other people's comfort is the moment you finally start living.